What's up everybody, it's Drew Wilkins with Swine and Bovine Barbecue, and in today's video I'm going to show you how to make some direct heat Memphis style dry rub baby back ribs. So let's get to cooking. So first we're going to trim these up. There's not a whole lot that goes into it. These are a little gnarly over here on the backside right there. So I am going to go ahead and just shorten this rack up a little bit. I'll save this meat for sausage, so not the end of the world. Over here, this bone's showing a little bit, so I'll trim it off as well. Got that off. Again, trim this off the bone, put it in some sausage. But the top side looks great. There's not much else to do to these ribs. They are trimmed. I don't peel the membrane off. I think the membrane actually adds a little bit to direct heat style cooking and even offset smokers. So we're gonna leave the membrane on, but this rack is trimmed up and ready to be seasoned. Sticking with the simplicity theme, we're just going on with kosher salt to season these ribs. We'll add a dry seasoning once the ribs are cooked, but all they're gonna need to start is just a decent amount of kosher salt. And I always use Diamond Crystal kosher salt. If you're using Morton's kosher salt, you wanna go on a little less, as it's a little more dense and a little heavier. Same thing with sea salt. Don't go as heavy, or table salt. But with Diamond Crystal kosher salt, it's got a decent margin for error, so I always like to go a little heavier, as the meat can take it and it'll pay off in the long run. That's all we're doing to these ribs at the beginning. So got them seasoned up, let's go fire up the pit. The Mini Chud Box Pro is rocking about 300 degrees, so we're gonna put these ribs on bone side down. Let them go like this for probably around an hour till the bottom side has nice color. Then we'll flip them. But now let's shut this thing down, let these suckers cook. Memphis style baby backs, one of my absolute favorite ways to eat ribs. Very similar to what I grew up on in Arkansas. Seasoned simply with salt, cooked directly over the coals. We'll rotate them about halfway through. Put the meat side down, and then we'll flip them back over and start hitting them with a mop sauce. And at the end, we're gonna finish them with a dry seasoned rub. More so a seasoning than a rub, really, because we've already put a generous amount of salt on these, so they're not gonna need any more salt. We'll have a little MSG in there for a flavor pop. Feel free to admit it if you don't like MSG, but I love these ribs. They're super simple. They're what I grew up on. We do have to make a dry seasoning, and we also need to make a mop sauce, which will include some of that dry seasoning. So let me show you how to do that. For our dry rub, we are gonna go in with some paprika. Good amount of paprika, that's the majority of this rub. Then we're gonna go in with some celery salt, chili powder, granulated garlic, granulated onion, table grind black pepper, thyme, oregano, some ground mustard, celery seed, mustard seed, and then lastly, for a little bit of pop and umami flavor, some MSG. There you go, we got our Memphis Dry Rub. Now let me show you how to make the mop sauce. For our mop sauce, we're gonna go in with half a stick of butter. Once the butter is melted, going in with one very small onion sliced up. Once our onions have cooked for a bit, we're gonna go in with a couple of cloves of crushed garlic. We're gonna go in with some sliced lemon, 8 ounces of apple juice, roughly the same amount of apple cider vinegar, decent amount of our dry seasoning, pinch of salt, and a little beer. Mix everything up, bring it to a simmer, and our mop sauce is done. 1 hour later, it's time to flip our ribs. So simply enough, just gonna flip them over. Got some nice color on the back side here. This membrane's crisping up. So we're gonna let them go an hour meat side down. We'll flip them and start mopping them. An hour and 10 minutes later, and our ribs are ready to flip. And boy, they're looking beautiful. Love the color that you get from direct heat. Got them flipped, now let's mop them. Simply enough, just gonna mop our liquid on top. Gonna shut it down, do this every 10-15 minutes or so till our ribs are nice, tender, and done. About 30 minutes and 3 mops later, our ribs are done. So gonna hit them with a mop one more time, pull them off, set them on the cutting board, let them come down in temp, then we'll hit them with our dry seasoning and dig in. Good way you can tell with tenderness. They flop and heck, they want to rip apart. So They are definitely tender. Our ribs have come down to about 140 degrees, so now it's time to hit them with the dry seasoning. Just give them a nice, healthy coating. Again, there's a little MSG in here, not much salt though, so you can go on heavy with this. Just layers of flavor with the salt, then the mop sauce, now the dry seasoning over the top, and boom, there you have it. Memphis Dry Ribs. Done everything we need to up to this point. Let's cut into these and eat them. As I've mentioned in other rib videos, I cut bone side up. Makes it easier to see. Remove some of the user air that can happen. Slice these up. Gonna hit them with a little bit more dry seasoning since some naturally transferred to the cutting board. But that's good by me. Let's dig into a nice middle one here. Cheers. They're incredibly good. I don't want to say incredibly good about everything I cook because fortunately it does turn out pretty well most of the time. But these ribs just remind me of my childhood, taking me back. Corky's Barbecue in Arkansas. A lot of it was a dry rub rib. And it's just a simple, really good way of cooking a rib. Again, you know, we just used salt. We just used a little bit of a mop sauce at the very end of the cooking process to add a little bit of flavor. But then you have the dry seasoning, right? And it's a seasoning, it's not a rub. This is not something you would want to put on the meat before you cook it. One, there's not nearly enough salt content. The only salt we have in here is from celery salt. We've got a little MSG as well, so it's not a rub. Don't use this as a base rub, and if you were to, at least make sure that you add some salt. But the flavor you get from these ribs is just so good, so different as well from a traditional Texas style spare rib or a wet rib. And again, the direct heat cooking process, if you're on the fence about getting a direct heat cooker, can't recommend them highly enough. The flavor you get from the traditional direct heat ribs on a video that I'll link right now that you can click and watch if you'd like. Finish watching this one first though. But the flavor you get from direct heat is superior to a smoked rib in my humble opinion. I mean, I love a good smoked rib, but it's just hard to beat the flavor you get from fat dripping down on the coals and cooking directly above charcoal. It's, you know, if you want to have a burn barrel and burn down logs and use those and do it the actual traditional way as opposed to using charcoal like I do, feel free. I don't have a burn barrel and I don't have enough wood to do that, so I like using charcoal, but it produces an excellent, excellent product. So good, perfectly tender. And baby backs, I mean, you can motor through a whole rack of baby backs. It's not overly fatty. It's not going to be too rich like a lot of the cuts in barbecue. It's not going to be too rich. You know, a lot of barbecue cuts are incredibly rich. Baby backs aren't so much incredibly rich, right? The spare rib comes from pork belly, so they're going to have a lot more fat content, a lot more richness to them. These, you can motor through a rack of baby backs and not feel overly full within 2 to 3 ribs. So can't recommend giving these a shot highly enough. It's a completely different flavor of rib, but in a good way. If you've never been to Memphis, go to Rendezvous. Or if you're in Nashville, go to Peg Leg Porker. They have incredible Memphis style or West Tennessee style ribs, which are dry ribs like what we've shown you how to do here today. So thank you very much for watching this video. If you like it, please make sure and give it a thumbs up. If you cook this, let me know it. Tag me on Instagram. My handle is @SwineandBovine_BBQ. And if you want to see me cook something next, make sure and leave it in the comments below. But thanks again for watching. Appreciate your time. We'll catch you in the next one.